Chinese Exclusion Act, spanning from 1882 to 1943, has shaped modern-day stereotypes and misconceptions surrounding the Chinese community. Signed into law by President Chester A. Arthur, the act was the first law to permit legal restriction of entry into the United States based upon one ethnicity, barring Chinese laborers from migrating into the U.S. and denying all Chinese residents from citizenship. By doing so, it unleashed a period of hate-based segregation, transformation of culture, and the formation of a new chapter in Chinese history.
The Chinese Exclusion Act revolutionized U.S. immigration policy by legally enforcing race-based discrimination, reforming perceptions of Chinese immigrants through stereotypes and segregation. Chinese Americans formed ethnic enclaves as a reaction, where culture was reshaped and whitewashed as a means of survival and resistance, reinforcing long-term stereotypes while influencing modern immigration laws.
Chinese immigration to the United States began during the California gold rush of the mid-1800s. Many Chinese laborers came seeking economic opportunities to provide for their families back in China, becoming the first wave of Chinese immigrants to arrive in America.
So, why did they come? Well, we know Canton and Macau or Zhongshan area is where the Chinese dealt with the foreigners for 200 years before gold was even discovered, right? You could only trade with China through Guangzhou and from Macau. And so these were people already dealing with foreigners for many years.
Political events such as the Great Taiping Revolt, a political and religious upheaval, pushed Chinese citizens away from their homelands, while economic opportunities like the California gold rush pulled them toward the U.S. The gold rush represented wealth, prosperity, and a fresh start, desirable motives after facing famine and death during the Taiping Revolt.
From the perspective of white citizens, this wave of immigration was a positive shift as they needed cheap laborers for undesirable jobs such as building the Transcontinental Railroad.
Then the people from the four counties, they were the laborers. Everyone knew in Guangdong province that if you needed people to work that were cheap, available, and hardworking, you went to Taishan, Kaiping, and the four counties to recruit them.
Chinese and Irish laborers began to fill numerous low-wage and dangerous jobs. However, Chinese opportunity for wealth shifted to exploitation, and white desire for immigrant laborers shifted to irritation as the Chinese began to take over the job market due to their hard work ethic at the minimal wage. This economic anxiety was a result of the Panic of 1873, which left the U.S. in an economic depression and further heightened tensions and competition for any job position.
At the peak of this economic anxiety, whites began to take restrictive action of their own against Chinese immigrants. They began by establishing the foreign miners tax, charging Chinese miners with a monthly fee, which then escalated into restrictions of rights, such as the right to marry, own property, and practice certain professions. Soon after, the Page Act of 1875 was created. It targeted immigrants, specifically Chinese women, based on race to restrict them from entering America.
To expand on their verbal harassment, they took violent actions as well. In 1877, a mob burned down Chinatown and beat up residents. And again, in 1885, another Chinatown was burned, this time murdering Chinese miners with it.
So the Chinese had to start going to San Francisco for safety, or they were burned out of towns. We have on record about 300 communities were physically burned out in the 1870-1880.
In response to these atrocities, the Chinese rebuilt their Chinatowns, setting up shops, businesses, restaurants, and more, leading to the slow creation of the Chinatowns known today.
Shops and stores all along Sacramento Street. Till today, Sacramento Street, the Chinese call it Tangrenjie, the street of the people from the Tang.
As whites' jealousy of the Chinese grew, more laws and restrictions began to take place, which were created by the frustrations that whites experienced, mainly from low-class and poor whites such as the Irish.
There was competition between the Chinese and the Irish. The Irish would consider low life. They were the workers. They were the laborers. And They had to compete with the Chinese for work.
This intense political pressure led to the official creation of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which was passed by Congress. This act became the first official U.S. law banning immigration based on nationality.
Although the acts were officially assigned by Congress, it was President Chester A. Arthur who finalized the acts by signing the law himself. He deprived Chinese laborers of citizenship by banning them from entering the U.S., also requiring identification for immigrants re-entering America. By physically burying the Chinese, this influenced them to start businesses of their own, including restaurants and laundries. Due to this, Chinese workers faced much discrimination, being called besmeared yellow devils.
And in San Francisco, 1877 was when there were riots in the city, and they were just beating up and killing Chinese. Any Chinese they found on the street, they just killed.
Frustrated, the Chinese violated the Chinese Exclusion Acts, finding loopholes of their own. Claiming to have only briefly left, Chinese laborers were able to re-enter the United States. However, this only led to further prohibitions on the Chinese, as Congress continued to renew the law while tightening the provisions of the act, creating other acts such as the Scott Act of 1888 and Geary Act.
In response, the Chinese came together to form the CCBA, the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association. This was an association formed by the Chinese as a safe haven, resembling the values of Chinatown. By doing this, the Chinese were able to fight for their rights, resisting the discrimination and hardships they faced by taking actions for themselves.
Within Chinatown, people relied on ethnic businesses and social networks to survive, since they were barred from many high-paying jobs and faced heavy taxes due to discrimination. Although life in Enclave offered protection and cultural familiarity, it also reinforced segregation, limiting opportunities to integrate into broader American society.
My mother was born in the year 1900 in San Francisco's Chinatown, and she lived in Chinatown throughout her entire life because they didn't have any choices. They were not permitted to move outside of the neighborhood. Things were redlined, there was discrimination, and people were very stereotyped.
These laws prevented Chinese immigrants from marrying Caucasians in certain states, and they were excluded from many educational institutions. Widespread racial and stereotypes and prejudice portrayed Chinese people as nothing more than temporary laborers who did not belong in America. As a result, Chinatown became both a refuge for discrimination and a symbol of how exclusionary acts shaped and confined the lives of Chinese immigrants.
President Roosevelt signed the Magnuson Act into law on December 17, 1943, repealing the Exclusion Acts. This granted the Chinese the right to enter the U.S. and become citizens, while establishing a quota of 105 Chinese immigrants per year. It was a decision rooted in political motives, as World War II was ongoing, and Japanese propaganda repeatedly referred to China's inclusion in the U.S. as an attempt to weaken ties between America and their ally, the Republic of China. Chinese immigrants during the acts had to learn English and give themselves an American name as a form of survival. Parents even invested more in their children's education to improve their child's chance at survival against discrimination. Although this was a method for social mobility, Chinese immigrants began to be segregated from the root, also contributing to modern-day stereotypes around Chinese intelligence and work ethic.
Although Asian hate is still actively present in modern-day society, it is nowhere near as bad as it was in the 1800s, and that progress is the result of these newly established laws like the Magnuson Act, and these actions slowly caused a shift in American society to think of the Chinese immigrants as not invasive, but people, even if they weren't considered fully American.
The Chinese Exclusion Acts revolutionized U.S. immigration policy by legally enforcing racial discrimination, reforming public perceptions of Chinese immigrants through harmful stereotypes. In response to this exclusion, Chinese communities formed Chinatowns, adapting aspects of American culture as a strategy for survival. SF Chinatown stands as a physical reminder of these unjust policies and the resilience of those affected, highlighting how understanding this history reveals the roots of modern discrimination, the progress made, and the work still required to achieve true equality.